Hey, welcome to Mission Bound. My name is Tom, and this is
Mike who?
Mike James, NBA champion, and we're so glad you joined us today on this episode. We're gonna have a whole lot of fun because we've got a lot of great show in front of us, and we were gonna talk about some things that are very, very real. But I wanna let you know that today's episode is sponsored by One Sports Nation, youth sports that's taking it all across the United States. It's fun, it's competitive, and it trains kids on how to compete at a high level. So One Sports Nation, we're glad that you're a sponsor today. Mike, today we're gonna jump in and talk about something that's very uncomfortable for me. I don't know if you know this, but I am white.
Yeah. Really?
Did you ever notice?
Really? I know you. Oh, now that I notice it now because your shirt is black.
Yes.
And you stand out. Okay.
Yeah. See,
Okay.
I knew you get it.
Okay.
I'm Anglo, and to be honest with you, we're going to talk about something that's a little uncomfortable for me, but it's the right kind of uncomfortable. We're going to talk a little bit about racism today. Mm-hmm. And Mike, I know me and you've had multiple conversations on this, but we're going to take it into the show today because our guests are two pastors that are pastoring in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And we know that Kenosha, Wisconsin was literally, it was one of the beginning points of this whole conversation of Black Lives Matter. And Mike, we're talking about racism, and I got to be honest, I grew up in a predominantly white family. I went to predominantly white school. I went to a college in Minneapolis, which was predominantly white. And then even when I lived in Detroit for over 11 years, I kind of stayed in my white world. And to be honest, I never really understood the history or the mindset of African American culture. And over the last few weeks, the last few months, even the last few years, this has been something that has slowly been changing my perspective. And so it's been huge. And so for me, this is going to be a really good episode. I can't wait to hear what our guests are going to talk about. But man, you've shared some stories with me. You've lived through racism in a way that's it's been profound for you. And I want you to just take a minute and talk a little bit about your experiences.
It's interesting when you talked about the way you was raised in a predominantly white community all the way throughout your life, and that's what you experienced. And then I go to my youth and growing up. I was raised around 5% nation. I was raised believing that I was taught that the white man was the devil. The white man was the one that suppresses us. The white man is the one that keeps the black man down. And so as a child, this was always embedded inside of me. And then I had a culture shock when I went to college. My freshman year in college, I went to Duquesne University, which was a 97% white school.
And where's that at?
That's in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Which is predominantly white as well. And so it was such a culture shock to me at first, because coming from where I come from and then going into this environment, I didn't know who to trust. I didn't know what to believe. And then I started meeting I have friends that are white, and I started meeting some really, I started gaining close relationships with white friends. And then I started learning that, not all white people are devils. And I've also experienced some black devils along the way. And then, it really raised my awareness. But I think that going to college at Duquesne helped me understand that, you can't blame a race because one apple can spoil a bunch. But the problem is we look at the bunch and then we judge the whole bunch on that one apple.
By one, yeah.
But at the same time, you may only have one bad apple, but you're willing to throw away and sacrifice a whole bunch and a whole bag, but nothing else might not be tampered with. You might have nothing but the most purest, most beautiful, sweetest apples, but you won't know it because of that one experience.
And that's where racism comes in. You don't get a chance to actually see the people that are different than you in a unique way, because you associate one negative thing and you lay it on everyone else. And I got to be honest, I think that happens, it seems like, on both sides right now. And that's what's happening in our country. African Americans are blaming police officers, and police officers have been blaming African Americans. And all of a sudden, everyone quickly jumps to a side. No one listens, and everyone starts judging. And then all of a sudden, it's just heated up.
I don't think we're blaming police officers. I think we're blaming white hatred all over again. And it just so happened that they carry a badge and they have a gun and authority.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing that has been the biggest issue, is not that it's a police. So it's not blacks against police officers. It's blacks against hate coming from white people towards black people. That's where the issue is. And it just so happened that the people that is showing the most hate at this moment are white police officers.
And it's largely due, anytime there's hate, there's complete distrust there, right? Hate is always driven by, I don't trust you. Because I don't trust you, I'm going to not like you, and so forth and so forth. And that's the problem, I think, right now in our society, with all these rioting, all this anger. The distrust suddenly gets wider instead of us connecting together and figuring out where we do understand. And I know today, this conversation for me is going to be probably pretty important, because it's about building the bridge instead of separating and creating the valleys. And I think our society today has to ask the question, how do we build the bridge rather than keep the valley and keep the chasm? We don't want to create the Grand Canyon of misunderstanding. And I think that's what's been growing and evolving over the last 200-300 years. And so hopefully today's going to be a good show about that. What's one thing that you wished would happen in our country right now around this issue of race?
I think that the church has to stand up more. I think that, I remember my mother used to always scream revival.
Yeah.
And I had no idea, like, what is a revival? Like, what are you talking about? And I've heard revival for so long, but I've never really experienced a revival. I've never really been. And what does that mean? That means that when the love of God takes more authority and take control of a situation. And I don't think that right now the authority, the power that God gives us, we're not walking in it.
That's good.
And I think that has to be, he says, resist the devil and he will flee. He says, at the name of Christ, every demon bows. But that's only when you walk in that authority. So it has to be more than just words. And when we start the church really starts focusing on trying to change the hearts, that's the only way that this is going to change, because the hate is too much right now. It's too big.
And I think the church, to build on what you say, because I agree with you, love is the key. I mean, everything, when the pastor's side of me comes out, everything throughout Scripture is, hey, if you want to push back darkness, you better love. Love is the key. I think the church has to actually come together, though.
Yes.
I think the white church and the black church have to suddenly become like a church.
That's where the unity has to come first. Before the unity between black and white happens in the streets, it has to first, because the church is still not together. Yep. The church is still each individual church. And it's until the heads get together, the black heads and the white heads get together, and they start forming and coming together and unite. And that's going to now start showing the equality and start showing, then the love can be exposed that much more.
And that's why I'm excited about today's show, because we have two pastors, an African-American pastor, an Anglo pastor, and they are friends in the hotbed of where racism is alive and burning right now, being Kenosha, Wisconsin. And I cannot wait to hear their perspective on what we're talking about today.
I'm excited, not really, but I am.
Right? This is an uncomfortable talk, right?
Yeah.
It is, but it's going to be good.
We're talking about free throws right now.
Right, I know, right. We'll get back to sports, but today's going to be a unique episode, because I think it's a conversation that matters and we need to have right now.
Yes.
So let's jump into it. Dave and Kirby, thanks for being on the show today. We're glad you guys are here. How you doing?
Hey, glad to be here. I thought you guys were only interviewing athletes, so I thought that's why you asked us. I had no clue this was also pastors that you would interview. But we'll go with both. We're athletes and pastors.
They play basketball with the youth team at the church. That's the athlete part of them. We get it.
They actually think dodgeball's a real sport. That's the best.
Hey, that's okay, though. It all works here. Welcome.
We're super excited to be on the podcast today. Again, my name is Lawrence Kirby. I'm a pastor here in the city of Kenosha. So thank you for inviting us, gentlemen.
We're glad you're here, Lawrence. Dave, tell me a little bit about your church. And you guys, obviously, Kenosha has been on the hotbed of the newsreels because of everything that's happened there. And just real quick, tell us how that has impacted what you do. And I'd love to hear from both of you guys. How did this the shooting in Kenosha affect the city, and ultimately, how did it affect even church?
All right, so I pastor Great Lakes Church in Kenosha. We started in 2009, and just over the years have grown. We've got a couple different campuses. One of our campuses, and the one we actually started with, is in Kenosha. The other one is about 20 minutes away in a city called Racine. But here's the deal. Over the last several years now, we have, as a church, been doing our best to work on things pertaining to race and really helping lead our church in understanding what it looks like to be a more integrated church, to be a church that cares about issues that maybe don't pertain to you because of your skin color and that kind of thing. And so I felt like, man, we've been making progress. And then, of course, August 2020, we start to see some things unfold in our city. And this is where, as a white middle-aged pastor, things became very challenging for me. Because like everything, you'd think something is simple as yes and no. You'd think something is simple as it's right or it's wrong, but it's way more complex than that. And as a white middle-aged pastor, I have to lead a primarily white church through understanding what's happening and through trying to figure out for us how fast do you put your how much do you put your foot on the gas pedal and go full steam ahead? When do you take your foot off the gas pedal in talking about these issues? Because as, again, leading a primarily white church, there's a lot of people who just don't want to talk about it, or don't want to hear about it, or feel like it's blown out of proportion, or want to say, hey, you say Black Lives Matter, but have you ever looked on their website and seen what the organization stands for? And then trying to separate sometimes the sentiment of Black Lives Matter from everything that what someone could accuse the Black Lives Matter organization of standing for, And so it's just been a very, very challenging thing. And thankfully, over the years, I've developed a great relationship with Pastor Kirby. And he's spoken at the church many times. And so I've just quite honestly relied on him. And when you guys reached out and said, hey, would you be willing to be on the podcast? I said, hey, if Kirby can be with me, because I'm learning a lot from Kirby.
Yeah, I've been leading the church here in the city now for 10 years, and we're actually knee-deep in relaunching as a multi-ethnic church. So our church is increasingly more mixed in terms of our congregants. And so just looking at the landscape of Kenosha and all the things that are happening, we're just in the position to kind of deal with them because we've been dealing with issues of race and ethnicity, even in the context of local church. I spent 4.5 years as a police and fire commissioner here in the city, so helping make decisions for law enforcement and kind of the top level here in the city. And man, when Jacob Blake was shot, our community immediately began to grieve. And it was such a traumatic experience watching the video and seeing it as another instance of disparity and injustice in America. And right away, a divide began even in Kenosha as people begin to choose sides and make comments. And so right away, kind of an underlying racial division that existed in our city has come to the surface in this time. And so the last few weeks, we've just seen, just a lot of heinous and ugly things. We've also seen some beautiful things with people and churches coming together and praying and processing issues and learning a lot. So it's such a painful and terrible time, but at the same time, I'm super hopeful about what God is doing and how people are mobilizing in it. So.
I think personally, the biggest issue now that's going on is God is love. The church is supposed to be a safe place. And one thing that God is always tries to teach us is that to love God, love people like you love yourself. And if you can love a person like you love yourself, well, then you don't see a color. And I think that's the major issue in our society is that we judge everything based off of status, where you at successfully in life, and really, on color. And so this has been what we've been raised even as kids. And so, but what we've always going away from is the things of God. We cannot allow the hate of this world and what people look at as the normal to be the thing to determine and to decide our decision making moving forward. And that's the sad part, is that it's such a separation, but it all comes back to God's love. And if we can't expose and express God's love in 2020 more, well, the hate it ain't going nowhere. It's only getting worse. If you look at it from the times of our community to where we're at now, our society, from the days of slavery to segregation to all that's happening now, we've been as a black male, we've been dealing with this for a long period of time. But the one thing that I had to learn is God's love has to be greater than man's hate. And so that's what taught me how not to retaliate. Because if it was just for the hate that I'm getting, that the hate that's being given to me, I'm going to give hate back. But now, what are the things that you guys are able to show your congregation, and how during this hateful time and during the time that, you know, is so heated, how do you keep God's love? And how do you share that to your people?
So for us, a couple things in just our philosophy of ministry at our church. Number one, as a multi-ethnic church, we choose not to be colorblind. Because if our church is colorblind, then dominant culture will almost automatically take over what we do. And so we borrowed this phrase from Dr. Derwin Gray, who pastors Transformation Church in South Carolina. He says the multi-ethnic church is not colorblind, it is color blessed. And so we see the variety of people groups that God has created. And we celebrate the people groups. We celebrate those differences. And it's in that we're able to have open conversations about race and ethnicity, but from a place of love and in a way that builds versus destroying. And then the second thing in our philosophy that we say is embrace the awkward. You know, when people come together, there's going to be awkward conversations. People are going to say things that aren't quite right. And we have to embrace it and give each other the grace to learn and figure out things about each other. One of the things you said, Mike, is that church is supposed to be a safe place. And we have to make sure that we create that even around conversations with race. Because one of the challenges I see is that the church has kind of ignored issues of race. And we've almost relegated it to politics, so that we can't talk about these issues in church from a place of love, from a place of understanding and growing. And so now the world outside of the church has to kind of grapple with these issues without the voice of the church being in it.
So when this happened and that police officer shot Jacob, and from what we heard, the whole city went into chaos. What was going through your minds the first few days when it all started going down? What were you thinking? Did you immediately see opportunity, or were you like, man, we got to just pull it together right now?
My initial response was frustration, because I felt like, man, our community just in general is a pretty tight-knit community. A lot of the pastors get together regularly. Like I said, Kirby speaks for us. I felt like our community has made so much progress over even the 11 years I've been back in my hometown of Kenosha. And then I thought, yep, this is going to push us back a lot farther. I watched how our church has made progress. And so it was very frustrating for me. I was very hopeful because I know the foundation we have, but I'm wondering how you initially responded.
So I watched the video probably 5, 6, 7 times in a row. And man, I sat down at my kitchen table, just began to weep. Because it was so frustrating and so painful, because I feel like for years, some of us have been saying in Kenosha, we don't want to be the next Ferguson. We don't want to be the next, fill in the blank of system of the injustices that we've seen around the country. And so there's been opportunities, especially in law enforcement, to kind of move the needle and change some things. And we just have been slower to do that than we should have been as a community. And so then this happens, and it's like, here we go. So right away, for the first couple of days, it was hard for me, just frustrated, angry, just grieving, to see that young man. Is a constant reminder. It brings back experiences that I've had growing up negatively with law enforcement. It brings back every other person we've seen, lose their life to police officers in ways that are unjust. And so there's this connection of trauma that goes back to Reconstruction and how policing has existed in Black communities in our nation. And that's one thing that we got to make sure is a part of this conversation, that there's a history of brutality in Black and brown communities that dates back post-slavery to Reconstruction. So there's a reason why there is a distrust, or when Black folks see these videos, we automatically like, okay, I know what that is because I've seen that before. I've experienced it before. And so there's this immediate frustration and pain. And then as I just kind of prayed through it and talked to people, then came, how do we pull together? So we started kind of organizing prayer meetings and pulling churches together, being out in the streets, talking to young people, but at the same time, pushing the needle for justice. So also being in conversations with our city and the mayor's office about police reform and those things that need to happen here as well. So.
And tell me about that. Since this has happened, what kind of police reform is in process?
So the mayor released last week a commitment to action plan. Myself and a few other pastors have been a part of this team of kind of leading what police reform will look like for Kenosha. They've done a couple of things already, and there's several other things that we want to see done. One is they put body cams in the budget. So come January, KPD will go through the process of having body cams because there's been a bit of a cry from the community for our officers to have body cams. But the city has just been slow on the take in a few ways with instituting body cams for a few different reasons. Secondly, they begin to increase the training budget already for next year, which will allow some very specific opportunities to better prepare officers in terms of de-escalation. I'm also pushing for an educational course on the history of policing in Black communities so that officers can understand when they go into Black communities, there's a reason why there's a resistance to their presence in general. And it's not because Black people are overtly criminal, it's because there's a history of abuse. And those stories and experiences have been handed down from generation to generation. So if you understand that, hopefully it'll give you a better peace and help you better navigate building trust in those communities. Also more community policing initiatives to figure out how to connect officers in communities outside of negative experiences. And there's a few other initiatives that we'll be working to. Right now, our city is doing a series of listening sessions. So the next 4 Sunday afternoons, the community will be talking to our police chief, our mayor, and others about issues in policing and what they see as solutions. And so part of what we'll do is take all that information together and then develop that strategic plan of what exactly needs to change in KPD. We'll also review use of force policy, of course, and those kinds of things for our city.
Personally, I think that there should be a better background check, on police officers, because if I was part of a brotherhood or a white supremacy, or if I was a father and I had a child and I wanted to keep it going, I would tell my child, get a police job. Get a job. I want you to become a judge. I want you to become a lawyer. I want you to be in a position of power where you still have authority and you don't have to use your authority physically, but you still can oppress. And so if I'm thinking like this, I'm pretty sure that mindset has already been embedded inside of a lot of these police officers. It really I don't think it has anything to do with the police officers in the urban communities. I think that the hate is already in their heart. It's not about a fear of being around a Black guy and I don't know if this Black guy is a gang member or is he gonna hurt me. I already think that the intention's already been set on there's already been a mindset that's already been made where they're going to discipline the difference between a white criminal and a Black criminal, and so I think that's already has been put inside their head. So background check mainly is more important than anything, because no matter how much hate is in my heart, you can let me watch 20 hours of film and I'm still going to be looking at it like whatever. When I get out on that field, I'm still going to have fun with my gun.
And you're telling me that background check would be to pick up any racist tendencies or racist mindsets that are in there. And if you catch them, really put another filter.
You can't hide it. And I think that that's the problem is, if you don't expose it and if you don't talk about it, then no one's going to bring it up. But if these are things that are brought to the awareness, then you might hear of problems that a person or incidents that a person may have had in the past 10, 15 years racially that no one really thought about then and just threw it under the rug. And now here it is. You done killed 3, people that's a different color from you. Are you having a problem in these urban communities where you're one of the police officers that's always giving the kids issues? They always having problems with you because this already been inside of you.
And I want to speak to that a little bit because I think this is a part of the problem that's bigger than law enforcement. There's a perception in America that black men are more dangerous than other men. And that perception began with slavery because you had to create a psychological construct to be able to enslave a people group. And so you had to make them less than human. You had to make them animalistic. You had to create this framework to justify enslaving people based on skin color. And that mindset still exists in America. It's just kind of shifted and morphed. And so there's this notion that, the black guys, they're dangerous. And culturally, that's embraced long before any officer puts on a badge. And I think it speaks to the disparity we see in how unarmed black men are shot at an alarming rate versus other armed citizens in our country. And so there's something to this notion, this culture, black guys are dangerous, black on black crime, they're killing each other. And they're like there's this philosophy that America has embraced that's based on fear that suggests that we're just more dangerous than other people.
So Kirby, I had a talk with Mike before we filmed this episode, and he shared some of the things in even more detail that he's experienced, and I hear that you've experienced. And I got to be honest with you, I grew up in a predominantly white culture. And I went to a college that was a white college. And I even lived in Detroit for 10 years, but I lived in the burbs, to be honest with you. And I never experienced racism like this. And so I'm this Anglo guy getting thrown into it. And the question on the table is this, for me, it's, is there a way that Anglos can understand the history and your story, so we understand your mindset, and how do you attach authority on top of that? Because I think the tension is, first of all, we need to not be separated. We need to come together. We need to work together. We need to do podcasts together. We need to do all these things together for us to really get and understand each other. But the question is, how do we end up doing that? And then how do you bring authority into that with police officers? You know what I mean? Because that brings, what's the officer's job is to protect and to serve. But if you don't trust the officer, that's their real mission, there's tension in that. How do we bring police reform in the right way? And how do we begin to work together rather than just stay in our separate islands,
I think it starts with relationship and research. I think those are two words that immediately ring out. Part of it is relational, intentionally being in relationships with people that look different than you. Because the relationship will begin to open you up and help you better understand, and it will help to debunk generalities that you might have embraced about that other group. And then from there, research, begin to look at history from a different perspective. Dave and I were talking as well before this podcast. Our view of American history is shaped by like an elementary class and a middle school class that we take on American history that is extremely watered down, extremely whitewashed, and extremely inaccurate in a lot of ways. And for most Americans, those two classes shape our view of the history of America, and we don't do any more studying after that. That's black or white for the most part, unless somebody intentionally puts information before you. Like I had a youth pastor that not only taught me about Jesus, but began to teach me to study black history and understand that context. So had it not been for that individual, I would have only believed what I learned kind of in public school, which was this overly simplified understanding of American history. Because if we don't understand our past properly, then we don't understand where we're going. You know what I mean? And as a nation, it's not anti-American to be honest about the atrocities of our country and even the mistakes that our leadership have made historically. But our history classes don't teach those things. Now, as it relates to policing specifically, I think we need to reevaluate and reshape how we train officers in police academies from the very beginning. from psychological evaluations to more intensive training. I've been seeing a meme going around that basically says you need more credit hours to become a cosmetologist than you do to become a police officer in the United States. You know what I mean? Like, and when you think about that, it's like, wow, I got to take more classes to do hair than I do to be in communities with a weapon. And I think we really need to reevaluate how we're training officers from the very beginning. Because there are issues of authority. We see people abuse power in every career field, you know, in the world, right? We see people get power and it kind of goes to their head and there's abuse of power. But it's so damaging in law enforcement for an individual to take that authority and twist it and manipulate it, because it's life and death, literally life and death for individuals. So I think as a country, we have to do a better job of preparing officers to handle authority, preparing officers to deal with situations, preparing officers to de-escalate, dealing with racial bias and these kind of things on the front end with psychological testing and classes and that kind of thing. I think we really need to completely restructure how officers are trained in academies before they're even hired by departments.
So, Dave, what's your take on the city of Kenosha moving forward? Are you hopeful, or are you still, wondering what it's going to be like in the next few years? Where are you at?
Yeah, no, I'm very hopeful, and I've seen the support for what's happening in the regards to police reform and people being excited about moving forward. Obviously, there's always going to be some resistance, but I think the mistake that is often easily made is thinking that everybody's just going to move forward together at the same speed at the same time. And what I've learned is you have to let everybody go at their own journey. And so when I gave a talk regarding race issues to our church not long ago, I talked about how 3 years ago, when people really started talking about Black Lives Matter, I was the guy saying, well, all lives matter. Now, I wasn't dumb enough to say it up front, right? But I'm saying it in my mind, all lives matter. But what I started to do was listen. And I started to broaden my network of friendships. I started to read books. And I have no problem using my influence, my platform to say Black Lives Matter. Same time, Colin Kaepernick, when he kneeled, my brother was killed in Iraq. So what do you think my response was to his kneeling? I'm not a fan. But as I listened, as I took time, I have no problem myself taking a knee at this point. But it took time. And here's what I have to realize. That's my journey. My friends, my family, they're going to be at a different place in their journey. My hope is that everybody just keeps taking steps forward. We listen, we learn. And I think the best way to do that is to develop relationships and true friendships with people of color or people who look different than you. So I would say for someone of color, developing friendships with people like me.
I think that you put yourself in these situations, but it's always going to be there. It's never going to go anywhere. So the people got to love on a different level, because the hate is only getting worse. Like we were supposed to been trying to figure out how we were supposed to be compatible and work together back in the 60s. This isn't a conversation that we're trying to figure out how we're supposed to interact with one another in 2020. And this is, so yes, everyone gets to it at a certain time in their life, but the problem is time is running out even faster because the hate is being exposed that aggressively that much more. So if we don't get on a crash course and try to figure this out on a level where we can learn together, then the hate is not going to give the love a chance to ever be exposed or expressed. I think it's either going to go either way now. It's either going to be God's way or it's going to be the world's way, the enemy's way. And so I think now is that time where, back in the times of Elijah, where you pick your side. And, it's being more exposed and expressed now. Either you're dealing in hate or you're dealing in love. And if you're dealing in hate, that's going to be expressed and exposed more. And if you're dealing in love, I think that's going to be the thing that may be judged more and may not be liked the most, but that's going to be the thing that upholds and keep our community and our country together, especially now.
Yeah, I think love is going to be more countercultural than it's ever felt before. It's always been a nice buzzword, but now if you really say, no, I'm going to choose to love that person and they're different, you're going to be seen as, in some ways, possibly as weak, you know? I would agree with you, Mike, on that.
My question is, how do we accelerate this? Because I absolutely agree. We have to accelerate it. But we all know acceleration isn't going to happen because somebody gets in your face and calls you a racist.
Right.
Somebody gets in your face and tells you, you're wrong about this and you need to come over to this side. So how do we accelerate it? Because I do believe everybody goes at their own pace, but we can pick up that pace. So
let me offer a suggestion. White folk have to aggressively take the ball and run with this. The governor of California made this statement a few months ago, and I agree with him. He basically said, white people created structures of racism in this country, and it's up to us to tear it down. And so in some ways, white America has to not only understand and build individual relationships, but begin to deconstruct the culture that has been created. And we talk about accelerating. Listen, black folk have been patient since 1619, waiting for white folk to figure this out. And so when you see anger and aggression and certain things, it's because since 1619, black folk have been saying, hey, this is whack. This is whack. Justice for all. Like, where is it? So for 401 years now, black folk have been waiting for equality and equity. And so we're at this point now. And one of the things I am excited about is we're seeing more and more white people really put in the effort to understand these issues and begin to champion them. And that's hopeful. But white America has to begin to see this as a human rights issue and not a political issue or a black issue.
I would agree with you. Being an Anglo guy, I would absolutely agree. We have to see it as those type of issues if anything's really going to change. Guys, you got 10 seconds each. I'm going to give you 10 seconds each to give us your final thoughts on this. And we just want to thank you for being on Mission Bound.
Thank you.
This has been huge. What a great episode to open up our eyes, to help us see a new way of thinking in the midst of a very turbulent time that we live in. And you guys lived in it and you're living through it right now. But Dave, I'll go with you first. Give us 10 seconds of what you think we need to do to bridge the gap.
Listen and learn, listen and learn, listen and learn. And then one of the things I want to learn is, how do we become a part of deconstructing what's happened? Because it's more than just showing up to some rally somewhere, right? How do we become a part of deconstruction?
Lawrence.
I would say race is the most difficult conversation that we have to have. It just brings so much pain and discomfort, but we have to have it. We mentioned Colin Kaepernick earlier and the uproar of him kneeling, but nobody was upset when Tim Tebow kneeled during the national anthem over abortion. You can literally protest anything in America but racial issues. So we have to be honest with this conversation. You can protest anything but racism in America without being criticized for it. So we have to have uncomfortable conversations and then push to see change.
So, yeah, it was good stuff.
Thanks again, guys, for having us.
Kirby, Dave, thank you for being lights in the middle of a crazy situation. Thank you for leading church as well and helping us believe in the church again. And thank you for being on our show today. It's been a gift.
Oh, it was a pleasure, man. Thank you guys for sharing with us today, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, we'll catch you guys later.
Thanks again, guys, for having us.
Man, today was great. And I hope that everyone that kind of listened in today got a chance to see how how we can actually win this battle and actually make a difference. And I love what Kirby said about, hey, we got to be better, and we've got to begin to listen, and we got to understand. And Dave said it best. He said, hey, we've got to actually come together, and we've got to actually be in relationship. And that's kind of why I like this show, Mike. You're teaching me different perspectives, and you know what I mean? We're actually learning from each other as we go down this road. And man, what'd you think about today?
Man, when the church starts uniting and coming together, I think that's going to be the big key.
Yep.
Instead of it being so many individual churches and so many individual places, I think when we start uniting and now the Spirit of God is coming down on the whole instead of units, I think that's when this is going to defeat the evil and the hate that's going on in this world. It's not getting any better. It's only getting worse. 2020 was a year of sorrow so far, and we still have to finish this quarter. And no one has really. There's a lot of people that they say they can do without 2020. And so, what is it there's going to be the difference in what we're doing than what we've seen as the norm. It has to be God's love. That's the only thing that I think is going to be the counter to what we're seeing. Other than that, it's on the hate is only going to get worse.
Yeah, I love the fact that, hey, we talk a lot about sports. We talk a lot about the NBA and NFL and other sports, but obviously both of us have a faith background, and we both have a relationship that matters to us with God. And this conversation really is that relationship we have with God has grown because we've experienced church and we've lived in it and we've been built by it. And I think the church is going to be, like you said, the catalyst. It's going to be the catalyst to fight racism. 100%. It's not going to be more rallies. It's not going to be anything else. That will bring it to the surface as it is now, but what's going to solve it? What's going to cure it? And I think God's the key in there. And so I'm going to encourage you guys, if you are looking for a relationship with God, I know you came here listening to a sports podcast talking about racism, but let me just tell you, one of the most important things you can do is connect with God. And we believe that happens through reading the Bible and understanding him better. And so hope that you do that, right?
Yes, of course.
That's a big deal. And so we'll be back. Hey, we've got more episodes coming up. I hope you enjoy this. If you liked it, please forward it, subscribe, listen on a regular basis. We got a lot of good stuff coming up. And we want to thank you for hanging out with us today on Mission Bound. It's been fun.
Thank you. Boy, I thought you was about to do an altar call and have everybody in the audience standing up at their home.
Praise the Lord. But we do have to do this on the way out. 1, 2, 3, 4.
My name Mikey G. When I play the real bro, they all scream my name. Mission Bound. Holla at your boy.